Hello, welcome to Conversations. I'm Jim Blow, your host. Very pleased to have joining me today Gregory Dill, Washtenaw County Administrator. Welcome back to Conversations.
Thank you for having me.
Of course, and you've now officially been the administrator since this past November, but you've been with the county for how long, and how did you move up the ranks?
Roughly about 13 years, and spent most of that time leading one of the support services groups. Very close to administration. Spent most of my time downtown supporting administration. And then about 3 years ago, I was appointed interim deputy county administrator. Spent a year and a half, almost 2 years in that role. And then in February of last year, the board appointed me the interim county administrator. I spent months during that job until November of last year, and when they took affirmative action to appoint me permanent administrator.
So remove the interim tag along the way.
The interim tag,
right?
Yes.
And so now, as the you say official county administrator, you work, you could say, at the will of the county board of commissioners.
Yes,
And that's who you report to.
Absolutely. I, along with Curtis Hedger Corporation Counsel, are the two employees that report directly to the 9 board of commissioners.
And then we also within the county have, what is it, 4 other elected county-wide officials, I believe it is?
Yeah, technically 5. Okay. The sheriff, treasurer, clerk, water resources commissioner, and boy, I'm blanking on
Register. What used to be the register of deeds, which is now combined with the clerk.
Exactly right.
Right.
Yeah,
so as the administrator, you work with them, but their, you say, responsibility is directly back to the voters.
Exactly.
But you also work with the county board, who you report to.
Yes.
And they're responsible back to the voters. So you, in a way, sort of cut and sort of in between, and you have to try and please everyone.
Well, some days, yes.
Yeah.
And I see my role as one of provisioning of resources. You know, the board authorizes the administrator to work very closely with those units. We have a duty and a responsibility to make sure that those units have the resources necessary to fulfill their collective missions. And we try to do that very well. We've always been. This county has a reputation for being strong fiscal stewards. We've always been able to operate that way, and I'm very pleased that we are continuing down that path.
You mentioned the financial aspect, and over the past, I would say, 8 to 10 years, that's been one of the primary both concerns and issues facing Washtenaw County and most of the more local governments within the state of Michigan. How does the county get revenue, and where do we stand today as compared to the last 5 to 10 years?
Okay. Well, so, you know, the county acquires most of their revenue through tax dollars. You know, in addition to that, there is a revenue sharing component, and those two components largely make up our general fund allocation. Our current general fund allocation is just over $108 million, and those are the resources that we use to provision the services that go to all the voters and the residents.
You mentioned about $108 million as far as resources. Revenue sharing is from what units of government, both federal and state?
See, most of that comes from state government.
Okay.
Yeah, and that has remained flat over the last few cycles, and we continue to, you know, in essence, in effect, we do more with less, because while revenue sharing hasn't decreased, we're still facing, you know, inflation, simple inflation. Costs of doing business is going up.
Healthcare costs, all the different things
Absolutely.
that you have to maintain with. While the pot might be the same, it doesn't quite go as far.
Absolutely right.
And and much of that, you say, comes from state, and that's because the federal government uses the state as sort of the funneling of
pass-through.
The pass-through.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. So I talked about the general fund component, about $108 million. There's roughly close to $200 million of additional resources that pass through from state and federal government, Medicare, Medicaid, and a variety of other sources. You know, we have a hand in that as well.
Does the county have the ability to determine how that additional $200 million is spent, or is it simply that you are the group, the agency that does what the federal and the state government mandates that you do, and here's the money to do it, but you don't really have much choice in it.
It is the latter. We really are here to make sure that the resources are provisioned in a way that state and federal government expects. That is our role. You know, we don't have a whole lot of latitude around that component of our budget.
Then the just over 100 million that is, as you refer to, the general fund budget. What types of, how does that get spent and what is it spent on?
Well, it's frankly spent on all of the provisioning of all the services in the county, from public safety and justice,
Where the county has some choice in.
where the county has some choice in, to safety net services. That is a big priority for us right now. Our safety net services. You know, we fund items like public health, our health officer in her role in provisioning of those critical services. So that pot of money is what we use to provision those services. The 1,400 or so full-time employees are paid out of that pot of resources. So again, all of the mandated services and a few discretionary services come out of that $108 million.
And you mentioned the employees, and that's not only those that work, you could say, for you directly, but also all the members of the sheriff's department, all the members and workers of the clerk's office and the treasurer's office and the other elected officials and their agencies.
Yeah, our framework for, you know, I'll talk a little bit about the countywide elected officials. We essentially act as co-employers. You know, they operate their offices independent. They're elected by the voters. They answer to the voters, but we provision, you know, their resources and assist them with staffing. And of course, our 9 commissioners are instrumental in ensuring that they have the tools and resources that they need. So.
And I know in the city, you know, the elected officials would always talk about how really limited they are in discretionary expenses, because what do you know approximately what percent is sort of fixed costs? In other words, you have contracts for employees. So you can't really every year negotiate that.
Exactly.
And so when it gets down to the budget time, there's really not much of that 108 million left that the commissioners and what you can recommend to them of how it gets spent.
Absolutely, you're absolutely correct. You know, most of our costs are around salaries and benefits for our employees, and they make up close to 80% of our budget. So with that, you can imagine that remaining 20% is carved out in a number of different ways. So to the point that you're making, discretion is very limited. You know, when you look at that $100 million. So
you mentioned also that while the state and federal government may have revenue for what some of their mandates, the county government is the official local unit of government.
Yes.
And the state has both guidelines and requirements of services a county provides.
Yes.
Beyond the elected officials area, what else is Washtenaw County, you can say, required to provide, even if you may have an opportunity to decide how much money gets spent? What other types of things do you have to do?
Well, one of the big items is, you know, support for the judicial system, you know, our courts. You know, we're required to fund at a certain level. We're required to provide the infrastructure, the associated technology, the staffing, you know, based on, you know, state court guidelines. So we have very limited discretion in that area.
And the state doesn't give you additional money?
No.
When the state, because it's the state that determines salaries.
Right. Well,
of the judges.
Of the judges, yes.
And so when that happens, it impacts the county, but the state is not providing you with additional funds to make up that, you say, additional expense.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so how a court operates will vary county by county.
Right.
How many bailiffs,
yeah.
how many additional support staff.
No question. Yeah.
That you do have some latitude with.
Yeah. So there's a state court standard that we try to follow, but again, that variability that you talk about, it's different from county to county. In Washtenaw County, I think we're fortunate that we have a policy body that is heavily focused on ensuring that we provide the very best quality services for our residents. And they've always been very generous in terms of how they support those units. And again, we're a co-employer, so you know, our latitude and flexibility in those areas is quite limited.
Right. And one of the things that seems to be shifting some in providing services occurred this past, a year ago, November, with the voters of Washtenaw County approving a special dedicated millage to county roads?
Yes, yes.
And that provides money, for any county road?
For surfacing local roads. Some of that money went back to the city of Ann Arbor, for example, and some of the other local jurisdictions for maintenance and resurfacing of county roads. Most of that money is funded, allocated, and administered through the Washtenaw County Road Commission. But again, it was an opportunity for the voters to weigh in on the quality of road services in their community. And I think by all accounts, the feedback that I received, people are very, very pleased with what we've done with those resources.
And one of the things is, if you look at the county or the city of Ann Arbor, you have some roads that, let's say for Ann Arbor, are city roads that the city maintains. There are some that are county roads that technically they have, and then there are some that are state roads.
They're state roads, yes.
And so the funding for each of those, three, are there such things as federal roads within Washtenaw County?
I don't think there are any federal roads at this point in time. I'll also say that our road commission handles some of the state mandates. So, you know, the state will request or ask the road commission to maintain a certain road and fund the maintenance of that road. So that's how the system works. But again, what was pleasing to me as both a county resident and as the administrator is that the voters stepped up and said, listen, this is something we value in our community, we're going to fund it. And then we have a duty on the back end to ensure that there's the appropriate return on those investments.
Well, we're going to take a short break, come back and look at more of the future of what hopefully will occur in Washtenaw County. Ask our viewers to stay with us. We'll be back in just a moment.
CTN Sports, bringing local sports to you.
just wish there was some place I could watch my favorite local TV shows. Wow! Cool, where am I?
You are in a computer terminal.
Who said that?
I am the god of computers. I heard your wish and granted you access to my terminal.
Really? I've always wanted to be inside one of these things. So what's next?
Visit CTN's and the City of Ann Arbor's streaming and video on demand 82gov.org/watchctn.
What do I do there?
Here you can watch city meetings, community produced programs, school board and education programming, and a whole lot more.
Yes! This is great!
The live streams include CTN's 4 channels: government, public, educational, and community. Just click the sidebar for the channel you prefer and click play.
I can watch 4 channels. Cool.
The video on demand option lists city meetings and CTN series in drop-down folders for a quick and easy viewing process. Programs are listed by dates or you can sort by title.
Are you kidding me? I wish I knew about this earlier.
Visit 82gov.org/watchctn for CTN live streams and video on demand.
That's great. Now I can go tell my friends. Once I leave.
Goodbye.
Hello?
Hello, and welcome back to Conversations. I'm speaking today with Gregory Dill, the Washtenaw County Administrator. Had talked about, as you say, a millage to support the road resurfacing and repairing. Looking to the future, are there other plans or discussions about other dedicated millages to ensure that there is money available for different areas?
Yeah, absolutely. So the commissioners at our last meeting just approved ballot language for November for a millage dedicated to public safety and community mental health services in our community. The language includes a millage of 1 mil for 8 years. And the breakdown of those resources is as follows. 38% would go to support police services, 38% would go for community mental health services, and then there's a carve-out 24% that would go back to those police agencies that currently have established programs.
So the 38% you first talked about would be the Sheriff's Department.
The Sheriff's
In
Department.
providing services and safety support for the what might be considered the out county or the areas of the county that don't have their own police force.
Yeah. So there's a few gaps out there that we think those resources could help support, but also making sure that we have a sustainable funding model. As you know, as you and I talked off camera, our resources are severely limited. Our growth, we've been budgeting for a 1% growth, which really doesn't keep up with wage costs and inflation. So our ability to continue to provide the level of services that we always have is severely challenged. So this would afford us the opportunity to have some additional resources to move towards that problem.
And as you say, the 24% for cities like Ann Arbor, to ensure, you say, the potential support of voters in Ann Arbor, is that money would come back to the city as with the road millage to help fund the police within the city of Ann Arbor. And there are about 4 or 5 different sort of separate policing units within the county?
That's about right. As I think off the top of my head, the city of
Ypsilanti
and Ann Arbor.
Does Milan?
Pittsfield Township, Chelsea, city of Saline, and I think I'm missing someone. Milan has, and there's half of Milan sits in Washtenaw County. And so those jurisdictions have their own police agency.
But this would not be used to reimburse or to support. U of M has their own police unit, and Eastern, I believe, does.
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's only the governmental units.
The established governmental agencies. Yeah.
Right. And you say it's 1 mil, and another about just over a third is for mental health. What types of programs would that fund, and how are they being funded today?
So a couple things. So one, with the community mental health services, we want to be as aggressive as possible on the front end of the mental health model. And by that I mean making sure that we have the support services necessary so that individuals with mental health issues get the appropriate treatment and they don't end up, let's say, incarcerated or end up homeless, et cetera. Those are
Well, the incarcerated is their expense then for the
that's
county.
an
Yeah.
incredibly expensive way for us to operate, you know, and the impact on housing, homelessness in our community is impacted as well. So those are the kinds of things that we think we can mitigate with resources. And then there is an opportunity for us to get back to the level of programming that we had before cuts from the state level. So it is an opportunity for us to reset to the level that our community has long since come to expect.
You mentioned the homeless issue. Would this include the expenses for the homeless shelter or providing housing, or not that area that you say is not directly mental health but is supported in support of those?
Yeah, so there's no direct funding for
The
the shelter
or any other homeless program.
But again, we see the opportunity on the front end of the model to create some prevention opportunities that might have an impact on those numbers in the homeless shelter.
Right.
So,
And this is going to the voters, potentially going to the voters or no, it is going to the
It
voters.
is going to
You
the
said it's
voters
been
in November.
Approved,
It has been
the
approved.
wording of it.
yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And it is, I would say, it is not designated within the wording as far as exactly where the money would go within the different units, but more sort of the general 38% for what might be considered by the board public safety.
Yeah, it is broadly described in the ballot language, and you know, it's important for us as an organization to ensure the voters that the money that's outlined in the millage goes for the purposes that are listed on the ballot language, and we'll do everything in our power to ensure that
Why
occurs.
8 years?
Well, that's quite frankly what the 9 commissioners settled in on.
Okay.
So
I mean, often it's 5 or 10.
10,
and 8
yeah,
was an interesting number.
And it is an opportunity for us to align with our budget cycle. You know,
Okay.
we're on a quadrennial budget cycle, so we have a 4-year budget cycle. So the plan is to align with our 4-year budget cycle. So,
And should this be approved by the voters, does it fit in with the cycle? In other words, would it kick in at the beginning of a 4-year cycle?
yeah, so the plan is to have it on the ballot for November of 2017, but not collect until the following year. And that, of course, affords the alignment with our budget
Okay,
cycle.
okay.
Yeah.
Other than finances, because I would guess a large portion of each day is one way or another related to money, but other things are going on in the county.
Yes.
Are there any new, exciting, you say, programs or opportunities that the voters or the people of Ann Arbor have, not just Ann Arbor, but the county have with what's going on?
Well, there's a couple things that, in my mind, are really, really exciting for, I believe, for all of our residents. One, the county's embarked on a new initiative to update its web page and web portals. We want to add Facebook and social media to our portfolio. We want to ensure that our residents have a conduit to communicate more effectively across the entire organization. So we're really excited about that. This is the next wave of technology enhancements for us as an organization. And then our ability to work collaboratively with the local units of government. I work really closely with Howard Lazarus from the city. He and I meet on a regular basis, and we are really looking for opportunities for us to work better together. And doing that, I believe, saves taxpayer dollars. The other thing that I think is critically important is that we communicate more efficiently and more effectively. We have these artificial boundaries that say this is this community and this is that community. So our ability to ensure that we are talking across communities, across platforms, across organizations is critical. And we want to make sure that we are leading the charge in that area. So I'm really excited about the feedback I've received from the CEOs of the various local units of government.
You mentioned the webpage, and if
Yeah.
my memory is correct, Washtenaw was one of the first counties in the state
Yeah.
to have you could say, an active website.
Yes.
And that yet it hasn't seemed to have gone through a lot of updating in the last 10, 15 years. And it sounds like that's what
Yeah.
you could say is motivating
Yes,
some of this.
you're exactly right. So we were on the cutting edge of web development for counties, and then of course the bottom dropped out in 2008. Funding became challenged, and that's one of the things that really, quite honestly, took a hit.
I mean, it's not something that you could say is going to necessarily save lives
Right,
or
yeah,
provide
yeah,
an opportunity for someone to do better
Yeah,
themselves.
there's no direct services linked to the county's web infrastructure. Having said all that, we recognize that there are missed opportunities there. Opportunities for us to communicate more efficiently, more effectively. Opportunities to get the word out about
What's available to
programs
the
and services that are available. So we're back. We're back with what we think is the next version of that. We're very, very excited about it, and I feel like our residents will benefit greatly from this enhanced.
Is there a timetable for this development, and when? And is there going to be sort of a kickoff, not a kickoff, but a dedication to this new website?
Likely so. We are on track for a rollout towards the end of the year or into the first quarter of next year. We are looking at a number of different ways to roll this out. We have settled in on a vendor finally, and we're moving with a deliberate pace to roll this out as quickly as possible. So I'm looking forward to that, likely later, fourth quarter of the year, might slide a little bit into that first quarter of 2018, but very, very excited about it.
And that is something which is going to provide opportunities for everyone throughout the county,
Yep.
assuming they have availability of the internet,
Yeah.
but something to share with, you could say, with everyone.
Absolutely.
Well, I want to thank you for joining us this afternoon,
My
and
pleasure.
look forward to being able to see this new and improved and
All right.
exciting, you could say, communication tool, as
Yeah.
you refer to it as.
Yeah. All right. My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Great. I want to thank our viewers for joining us today and look forward to your continued support here on Conversations. Thank you.